sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the golden cornfield. It was an ordinary summer day until a heavy silence draped over the land, palpable and thick like fog. She crouched low, heart pounding in her chest, lost in a world of rustling leaves and tiny insects buzzing around her ears. The corn, towering and dense, wrapped her in a protective embrace, hiding her from the chaos that lurked just beyond the rows of green. She could hear them now, the sound of galloping hooves, thundering like an approaching storm. The posse was coming, and they were not just out for a casual ride. They were on a mission, one that would either bring justice or seal fates in the blink of an eye. Panic coursed through her veins, urging her body to retreat deeper into the foliage, further from danger. Memories flashed before her eyes, the laughter of her friends, the scent of fresh corn bread wafting through her grandmother's kitchen, and the warmth of the sun on her face during simpler times. But those memories felt like a lifetime ago. Now her reality was painted in shades of fear and uncertainty. The posse rode in tight formation, their faces grim, determined. Some wore masks, others let their identities show, hardened by experiences that twisted their souls. They were hunting for a ghost, or so it seemed, a person who had wronged them in ways they could not forgive. For her, it was more than just a matter of life or death. It was an escape from a past she thought she had left behind. Shouted one man, jerking a finger, his voice laced with anger. The others nodded, a collective murmur rippling through the group. She pressed herself to the ground, her breath shallow, wishing she could shrink into the earth itself. Would they find her? Would they unearth the secret she had buried so deep? As they rode closer, she could see the dust rising beneath the horses' feet, swirling like the turmoil in her mind. The sun glinted off their rifles, each gleam a reminder of the permanence of their intentions. They had answers, they thought they had justice, but did they know the truth? Did they know what really happened? Every second stretched like an eternity. She recalled that fateful night, the scream that echoed in her bones, the figure that loomed in the shadows, the raw fear that paralyzed her as she stared into the abyss. Her world had been shattered, and in its wake she had become a ghost herself, wandering through life trying to outrun the wreckage. But could she escape one last time? A loud shout erupted, slicing through the air like a hot knife. "She's here!" The laughter that followed was a cruel reminder of the darkness that existed in human hearts. They thought themselves righteous, but righteousness was often just a mask for cruelty. Adrenaline coursed through her, and she channeled it into action. With all the strength she could muster, she pushed herself deeper into the rows of corn, praying they wouldn't see her. The leaves scratched at her arms, but the pain felt sterile compared to the raw dread building inside her. She knew she had to stay quiet, to blend into the earth, to become one with the cornfield. A voice barked with authority. The horses shifted, the soft snorts mingling with the rustle of the wind. She held her breath, praying they wouldn't hear the erratic thumping of her heart. What they didn't know was that the true danger was not in finding her, but in what would happen next. Fear had a way of twisting judgment, making it easy to turn to violence when the truth became tangled. But she had secrets, painful and raw, secrets that held the power to upend everything they thought they knew. Just then a rustle came from behind, a snaking comfort, perhaps, yet ominous. Had luck turned in her favor, out of the shadows emerged a figure silhouetted against the fading light. It was Jake, a boy from her past, a fleeting friend. Her heart ached at the sight of him, both a comfort and a betrayal. What was he doing here? In that moment her thoughts raced. Should she call out to him, let him know she was here, alive? Or should she remain silent, hidden from both his kindness and imminent danger? Jake's face was strained, bathed in anxiety. He swung his head, scanning the field, his eyes narrowing as he searched for her. A mere nod could bring her closer to safety or veer her toward doom. She whispered, though her voice trembled like a willow in the wind. The plea barely escaped her lips, but somehow it reached him, and he froze, caught between wanting to help and knowing the risks. He understood. He had seen too much, but time was short. The posse was getting closer, emboldened by the thrill of the hunt, and she could feel their presence weighing heavily on her chest. They were searching for answers, yes, but it was a misdirection of fixation on vengeance that tethered them to relentless pursuit. She called out to Jake, her words laced with urgency. They think they're bringing justice, but they don't even know the truth. In that fleeting moment, the world hushed as if even the corn held its breath. Jake's expression hardened with realization. You were right to run, but there's a better way than hiding. She felt the warmth of his voice seep into her resolve. No, it wasn't enough. Hiding would not protect them. They needed a plan and exit strategy. The sun dipped lower and shadows grew longer. They were losing light, but she was not ready to give in. The sound of hooves thundered through the field, drawing ever closer. Emotions roared within her, a cacophony of fear, anger, and the love she had once felt for this boy, layered in memories that had gone stale. For a moment, everything hung in suspension. "Jake," she hissed, pulling on his arm, her voice trembling. "Use your presence to distract them. I'll make a run for the tree line." He looked fearfully at the mounting group ahead. "They'll catch you." His panic only fed her determination. "I can't stay here. If you care about me at all, you'll help. There's nothing left for me, only a shadow of a life I once knew." Jake's eyes burned with defiance as he nodded, the decision sealing their fates like a whispered promise. He stepped out of the cornfield, shoulders squared, bringing the attention of the posse toward him. "Hey!" In that split second, she lunged for freedom, heart racing, limbs flying as she tore through the rows of corn. Breathless, guided by the fading light, adrenaline propelled her forward. She didn't dare look back. She had to believe Jake would handle the confrontation. He was brave, but courage could mean life or death in the blink of an eye. As she neared the edge of the field, an exclamation pierced the night air. The command echoed, drowning out everything she wanted to hear. But she was focused now, not on their voices or the danger, but on her own escape. Just as she reached the tree line, hands grasped at her shirt, pulling her back into the nightmare. She screamed, a raw, desperate sound that filled the emptiness. But another scream erupted, this one from Jake. The world rushed around her, chaotic and unforgiving. The posse hesitated, the words hung in the air like the haunting call of a ghost. Someone shouted, and the uncertainty split through the group like a crack of thunder. Jake cried, his voice a beacon of strength. "You think you know what she did?" His bravery gave her strength. The fear surged again, yet it was different now. She felt empowered, and the weight of regret began to lift. The posse shifted, uncertainty gnawing at their resolve as they looked from her to Jake, then back again. It was a delicate moment, and she felt a teeter on the edge of tragedy. A figure emerged from the shadows, imposing and fierce. The leader of the posse, a man whose name was whispered with fear. Yet he underestimated her. With a final surge of power, she stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You don't get to judge me." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. The silence was charged, punctuated only by the rustling leaves and her shallow breaths. The posse exchanged uncertain glances, and for the first time their resolve seemed to waver. They hadn't expected this, a confrontation so bold, so raw. Maybe they didn't seek justice at all. Maybe it was revenge wrapped in a guise that chased a distraction from their own demons. And in that moment, she saw them not as hunters, but as fractured souls, lost and needing something to hold on to. "Turn around," she spoke softly, the tremor in her voice now layered with command. "Go home. Live with what you've done." With palpable tension, they hesitated right at the edge. The leader stood, jaw clenched, processing her words. Fear had no grip here anymore. It was clarity that hung in the air. One by one, the posse turned their horses, casting shadows that receded into the twilight. One of them yelled as they retreated, daring her to chase them. "Maybe not," she answered, the tension slowly releasing from her shoulders. As silence enveloped the cornfield once more, the weight of the world felt lighter. It was a moment not just of survival, but of reclamation, a fierce reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, facing the darkness could bring light. And as she stood there, shaken yet resolute, Jake returned to her side, eyes wide with concern yet filled with admiration. "You were incredible," he breathed, and she could see the truth reflected in his gaze. "Together, we can write our own story," she replied, her heart steadying with courage. With the setting sun behind them, they stepped into the fading light, ready to face whatever awaited on the other side of the shadows. The corn swayed gently, whispering secrets of bravery and triumph, as they carved a path into the future, no longer just hiding amongst the echoes of the past. The air was thick with the scent of summer, warm and rich. As the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the endless rows of corn. A soft wind rustled through the leaves, whispering secrets only the field could understand. But for her, this sprawling cornfield was not a sanctuary. It was a fragile shield against a storm that was closing in fast. She crouched low, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. The sweet, earthy smell of the corn mixed with the panic rising in her throat. In that moment, she was just a girl lost in a vast green sea, feeling both tiny and insurmountable at the same time. But that illusion shattered as she heard them. The thundering hooves of the posse, men on horseback, tearing through the quiet like a whirlwind. She held her breath, eyes widened, sweat trickling down her brow. It wasn't just the noise that terrified her, it was the purpose behind it. They were hunting, and she was the quarry. They believed she had done something unforgivable, and in their minds, justice was a blood-stained path they were willing to tread. The rumble of their approach sent her instincts flaring. She pushed further into the corn, the stalks closing in around her like towering sentinels. The whispers of the leaves above felt mixed with her own sizzling thoughts. How did it come to this? Wasn't it all just a misunderstanding? But those thoughts felt far too naive in that tense moment of hiding. The horseback riders were no ordinary civilian posse. They were driven by rage, fueled by the desire for revenge. She could hear them shouting, voices rising and falling like angry waves crashing against a shore. The vibrant energy was thick with menace. In the backdrop of fear and confusion, memories flared up, crashing like waves against the shore of her mind. She pictured her younger self, the girl who swayed gently to the sound of crickets, dancing in the lighter moments of life, dreaming under starry skies. How had that girl become the hunted? She could still remember the fateful night that had changed everything. The laughter, the arguments, the split-second decision that spiraled into chaos. A voice broke her train of thought. She can't have gone far. The leader of the posse was relentless, an iron fist wrapped in flesh. Fear settled into her bones. Escape wasn't just a wish anymore, it felt like her lifeline. Crouching deeper into the corn, she felt the stalks scratch against her skin. They were a protective wall, at least for the moment. But how long could she remain hidden? Would they scour the fields until they found her? Each stomp of the horse's hooves sent ripples of dread through the ground beneath her. Then a shout pierced the air. There. The posse suddenly halted, the sound of leather creaking echoing like a death knell. Hearts raced, not just hers but the hearts of those men too. Did they want justice, or was it revenge cloudy with rage? She could feel her throat tighten around her voice, but she suppressed her panic. There was no way they could hear her heartbeat echoing across the expanse, but even quieter breaths could feel loud enough against the backdrop of this chase. She couldn't let them catch her. She couldn't face what they believed they knew. The fleeting thought pulled her into another dark memory. The face of the one they were after, the one they thought she was protectively sheltering. A friend turned enemy in their eyes, caught in a web of circumstances that had spun far beyond her control. She never asked for the chaos that erupted that night. She didn't ask to witness the raw destruction of lives, but life made choices for her that she never would have consciously allowed. Another voice called, and it sliced through the air like a knife. They were impatient now, desperate for a conclusion. It reminded her of a pack of wolves, eager for the kill, sensing weakness. The irony hung heavily around her. These men thought they were executing justice, yet their actions screamed vengeance. With every beat of her heart, the realization sank in. It was just one more tragedy. The hunters were only human, flawed and lost, and yet she felt despair wash over her. Could she convince them of her innocence, or would she forever be just another shadow lost to their rage? Suddenly, a burst of movement caught her eye. Out of the corner of the field, another figure emerged. Jake, her friend. He was visibly shaken, dark eyes darting with panic as he looked towards the commotion. In that moment, hope and fear collided within her. Would he help her, or would he forsake her to save himself? She called, the words torn from her throat. But Jake didn't falter. His voice rang out, filled with a brave defiance that ignited something in her. It was a reckless choice, but love and loyalty can push one into dangerous waters. The posse shifted their attention, eyes landing on him, calculating, snatching new prey. "Jake," she shrieked. But Jake was already stepping toward the armed men, who gripped their rifles and glared with a mix of fury and confusion. He shouted, his voice raw with urgency. "She's innocent." The words didn't settle in the air gently. Instead, they broke apart into pieces, scattering against the hard ground. The leads of the posse exchanged glances, unsure. They needed someone to blame, a face to pin their anger and pain upon. But what Jake had failed to realize was that the truth often crumbles under the weight of emotion, and no one wanted to listen to reason. The leader barked, eyes narrowing at Jake. "We're not here for a debate," she echoed, stepping out from her hiding place, frantic but determined. "You mean revenge? You have it twisted." Her heart raced as she stepped further into view, revealing herself to the hostile atmosphere. In the recesses of her mind, she thought of retreat. The comforting embrace of the corn should have been her refuge. But she knew that hiding would only give their anger an anchor it desperately sought. The posse shifted restlessly, the hunters suddenly on edge, sensing the unexpected shift in power. "You shouldn't have come," one of them growled, his finger twitching near the trigger. "Maybe not," she replied, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "But if you think you're right, you've got it all wrong. Your thirst for revenge is not justice." She felt Jake's presence at her side, a beacon of support as arrows of doubt flickered within her. She needed him, this boy who saw her for who she truly was, not a victim, not a villain, but human. One of the men stepped forward, face twisted with anger. "You speak of justice, but your friend put innocent lives at risk." "No," she countered, fire igniting within her. "What's unforgivable is how you've let anger blind you. This is not the solution, can't you see?" A thick tension clung to the air, heavy with unspoken words. For a small moment, it felt like the world held its breath, waiting to see how the drama would unfold. "We're not the ones who'll pay for it," the leader finally muttered, swinging his gaze between the two of them. "But perhaps it could." "Leave this place," she pleaded, stepping forward slightly, defying the dominant force before her. "You think you came out to find a monster, but all you're going to find is more sorrow. I didn't ask for this." In the depths of her voice, a spark flickered. This was about so much more than one night, one decision. It was about humanity, how easy it was to lose your way when swept up in anger. It was the haunting notion that vengeance would always come back, a serpent wrapped around their hearts. The men hesitated, uncertainty creeping into their expressions as reality clawed at their bravado. The truth hung before them, radiating from her in waves, challenging their beliefs. Jake asked, his tone shifting from urgency to compassion. The leader hesitated, glancing at his companions, torn between loyalty to the mission and the flickering light of truth glowing between them. A soft whisper of doubt hung in the air. Were they really willing to stain their hands with blood? A shallow judgment based on misunderstanding. She felt it then, the quickening of hope fluttering like a fragile bird in her chest. "Justice comes in many forms," she pushed, searching their eyes for any glimmer of understanding. "And I promise you, tearing me apart will not bring you peace, nor will it avenge those you've lost. True justice would be letting the past die with its secrets." In that moment, the tension began to lift. Perhaps something had shifted, as fragile as the late summer light. She could see it in their faces, a softening, an acknowledgement of the emotional scars they all bore. There were no winners in this scenario, only ghosts chasing shadows. After long seconds that stretched endlessly, the leader took a step back, as if to breathe. The posse stood in a line, not hunters anymore, but a collection of souls confronted by their own painful truths. "This isn't the end," he finally muttered, judgment wavering. "You'll pay somehow." With that quiet admission, the posse turned away, horses snorting in the twilight. As the distance grew, the heaviness of despair began to dissipate. She felt Jake squeeze her hand in unease and relief. "We did it," he breathed, though doubt lingered in the corners of his voice. But life would keep pushing, they both knew it. There were still mountains to climb and paths to forge. They stood together amidst the rustling corn, the echoes of the past fading under the night sky, and in that moment they found a fragile sense of hope. "Let's face tomorrow together," she murmured, taking a deep breath. Together, they stepped away from the cornfield, ready to confront whatever awaited them in the vastness of the unknown. The sun dipped below the horizon, but even as darkness fell, they nurtured the lingering light of possibility. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sprawling cornfield, where rows of green swayed like waves in a sea of gold. It was a peaceful summer afternoon, but for her, it was anything but tranquil. There she was, crouched low at the base of the plants, surrounded by whispers of rustling leaves. Just moments ago, the world had been ordinary, but now, chaos had swept in like a storm. She pressed herself deeper into the cool earth, heart pounding in rhythm with the distant sound of galloping hooves. A posse was coming, and they weren't just riding for leisure. They were hunting. The weight of their purpose hung heavily in the air, making it hard for her to breathe. As she lay there, 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. How did it come to this? How did she find herself hiding in a cornfield, consumed by fear and desperation? The air carried the scent of soil and corn, vibrant and alive. It should have been calming, but instead it felt like a trap. The rustling of the corn seemed to mock her, as if the field itself were aware of her plight. But those weren't the words she needed to hear. What she needed was a way out, a way to escape the madness that hunted her down. The thundering hooves grew closer, and she dared to peek through the tall stalks. Her heart sank as she spotted the riders, their faces obscured by shadows, but their intentions clear. They rode like men possessed, driven by a need for vengeance that blurred the lines of justice. They were angry, and anger is a powerful motivator, a destructive force that can turn even the best of men into something monstrous. One of the men shouted, a deep voice wrapped in gruff determination. Panic tightened its grip around her chest. They thought they knew her. They thought they understood her story, but they were wrong. The truth was far more complicated, tangled in threads of emotion and mistakes that spiraled out of control. All she wanted was to be free, to untangle herself from the past that had clung to her like a shadow. Memories flooded her mind, flashes of laughter from better days mixed with darker recollections. A night of choices that had unraveled into chaos, a moment where everything changed. She had been with her friends, celebrating, enjoying the warmth of freedom, when fate dealt a cruel blow. A decision made in haste exploded into consequences that turned her world upside down. And now those very friends had turned into pursuers, painted in hues of betrayal and rage. Another rider barked, and her stomach dropped. They would not give up. They were driven by a primal urge to right what they deemed wrong. She wasn't just hiding, she was the embodiment of their ire, the target of their vengeance. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above her, but all she could hear was the thrum of her heart. Time stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. She fought to steady her breath, praying they wouldn't hear the erratic rhythm echoing in the silence. Just as the shadows grew deeper, she caught sight of a figure at the edge of the field. It was Jake, her friend. He had always been the one to see the goodness in her, to believe in her when even she had faltered. But would he be brave enough to stand by her now? Her heart ached with both fear and hope. She whispered hoarsely, feeling the fragility of their situation. She could see the tension in Jake's posture, a mix of worry and determination. He wanted to help, but at what cost? These men were ruthless, and she wouldn't let him put himself in danger. Yet Jake stepped forward, his voice ringing out through the stillness. She cried, but it was too late. The posse turned, their attention snapping toward him, the glimmer of rifles catching the fading light. Their focus shifted, and her heart raced with helplessness as she watched the scene unfold, feeling the weight of the moment press down on them both. The leader of the posse demanded, anger painting his features. "She's the reason for what happened." Jake's eyes blazed with defiance. "You don't understand, she's not what you think." For a fleeting second, she thought the tide might shift. Maybe, just maybe, they could see reason. But hope wavered as anger and pain clouded their judgment. They were desperate for answers that could only satiate their need for revenge, not resolve their own inner turmoil. The leader shouted, his voice now a weapon. "You're either with us or against us." Panic coiled tighter in her stomach. Did they truly want justice, or was this merely a hunt for something to blame? She had to act, and fast. In the clearest moment of clarity she'd felt, she knew she couldn't let them drag Jake into their chaos. She screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "I won't let you hurt him. I won't let you hurt any of us." Her voice echoed over the rustling field, unsettling the men. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across their faces. She could see the internal struggle, the line of rage dividing them from remorse. They were human, after all, flawed and complex. But fear drove them, perhaps more strongly than vengeance. One of them snorted, but there was a tremor in his voice. She could sense their hesitation, that slightest moment where compassion fought against anger. Jake stepped closer to her, fear now replaced with determination. "You need to let her explain. It wasn't her fault. We can't keep living like this, fighting each other." The silence that followed hung heavy, thick with the weight of conflicting emotions. It felt as though the world was teetering on the precipice, waiting for someone to speak, to break the tension that had enveloped them. Scoffed the leader, but his voice lacked conviction, faltering under the weight of Jake's words. She interjected, her voice steadying as she locked eyes with each man. "If you hurt me, you'll carry that for the rest of your lives." With that statement, she found her voice again, the hidden strength that had resided deep within her. Vengeance might feel powerful, but it only breeds more pain. The truth fought against the shadows and darkness lurking behind their anger. There's pain on both sides. We can either continue this cycle or find common ground. I'm not the enemy. The tension hung like mist in the air, and she could see the men start to shift uncomfortably, glances exchanged between them, unspoken doubts whispering in the silence. Shadows swirled, and for the first time they considered a path outside the darkness. However, humanity is complex. Years of pain don't evaporate simply because someone speaks the truth. The leader's jaw tight, still struggling between vengeance and understanding. "Sometimes words can cut deeper than any blade," she replied softly, feeling the gravity of her own statement. "You think you're chasing justice, but it's just a mirage." The words resonated in the space between them. It struck a chord deep within. Could they recognize the burden they carried, the cycle they perpetuated? The longing for revenge weighed heavily, but what she presented held the possibility of a different chapter, one that didn't end in bloodshed. "You're asking for mercy," the leader stated slowly, eyes narrowing but showing signs of cracking resolve. She took a step forward, heart racing in defiance. "Because we all deserve it. We didn't ask for this pain, but we can choose how to move forward." And just like that, something shifted within the posse. The air grew lighter, if only for a moment. Anger, once blazing bright, began to wane, replaced by something more uncertain. Could they really confront their own history? She'd never felt more exposed yet powerful all at once, laying her soul bare before them. One of the men shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "We've lost so much," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But I do," she replied, her tone filled with genuine compassion. "I lost what could have been too. We can confront our fear together, no more hiding." Silence stretched again, thick with vulnerability. In that moment, she grasped how fragile hope could be and how critical it was to hold on tightly. The truth slowly seeped into the cracks of their hardened hearts. And then the leader spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if? What if we truly listen?" The others looked like they were awakening from a deep slumber, beginning to shed the layers of rage that had cloaked them. Suddenly, the gallop of horses no longer echoed with pursuit but with possibility. They were all caught in the web of fear, but perhaps that fear could give way to compassion. Jake asked, his voice cutting through the uncertainty that hung in the air. "Now we talk," she said, looking each of them in the eye. "Let's share our stories. Let's understand what brought us here." The posse began to dismount slowly, the tension giving way to tentative curiosity. She could feel that the darkness, though still lurking, had begun to loosen its grip. The fight for justice could turn into a dialogue of healing. For the first time, they weren't enemies but fellow travelers on a difficult path. As they gathered in a circle, those harsh edges softened, and the sun continued to set, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Conversations unfolded, stories of loss and pain mingling with glimpses of understanding, transforming bitterness into something anew. In the quiet of the cornfield, life began again, not just for her, but for all of them. The journey wasn't over. Moments of truth and vulnerability faced together would create a new map where revenge and hatred once ruled. And as they spoke into the dusk, the world that had once hunted her now came together to heal. Underneath the watchful gaze of the stars and the whispering corn, she realized something profound. Sometimes when you think you're hiding, you're really just on the brink of finding yourself. In her heart, she knew that redemption, though a long road, was one worth traveling together. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows through the dense cornfield. It was a picture-perfect summer day, but for her, it felt like the calm before a storm. She crouched there, her heart racing, hidden amongst the rustling stalks. A peace that was both beautiful and eerie enveloped the field, but it was shattered by the distant sound of galloping hooves, growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. She pressed herself against the rough earth, her breath shallow, praying to blend into the very ground beneath her. The world outside the cornfield suddenly felt vast and hostile. Memories flooded her mind, gentle breezes, laughter with friends, how things had spiraled so quickly into chaos. Now there was only the drum of hooves drawing closer, threatening to erase everything she had once known. "They can't find me," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Just earlier that day, she had been a girl free of worry, roaming the fields under the warm sun. But life had its way of changing in an instant. The posse drew near, their voices crackling like thunder. One of the men shouted, his tone sharp and dangerous. "Don't let her slip away." Panic settled in her stomach like a stone. She had heard the murmurs, the accusations that turned friends into enemies. They believed she had betrayed them, that she carried the weight of a terrible deed on her shoulders. But they were wrong. What had happened was deeper than betrayal. It was a tragedy that had unfolded beyond her control. Desperate to focus, she closed her eyes and tried to steady her breath. But images flooded back, the fateful night when everything had changed. There had been laughter and joy, but then came the chaos, anger flaring, fists flying, and a moment of blind panic leading to a terrible accident. Now she was an outcast, a target for the very people she had once considered friends. The hooves pounded against the earth, growing nearer. Check the edges. They were relentless, driven by an anger that surged through them like a wildfire. She could feel their eyes searching, seeking her out, their breaths filled with rage. Just then she spotted a figure emerging from the edge of the field, Jake. Her heart fluttered with a mix of hope and fear. He was bold, but would he be brave enough to stand against the fear bubbling in the possession of the men chasing her? In that moment, instinct took over. "Jake." She called in a frantic whisper, her voice trembling with urgency. But Jake shook his head, his expression fierce. The posse turned their attention toward him, confusion flashing across their faces. The tension thickened the air. She felt paralyzed, torn between wanting Jake to help and wanting to keep him safe from the storm brewing around them. The leader growled, already drawing his horse closer. Jake shouted, his voice carrying an unwavering determination. Time seemed to stand still as the weight of Jake's words hung in the air. She could see the struggle in the posse's eyes, years of friendship colliding with a single moment of perceived betrayal. They were trapped in their pain and anger, refusing to see the bigger picture. Barked another rider, his face twisted in rage. With her heart pounding wildly in her chest, she stepped out into the open, away from the safety of the corn, an ember of defiance igniting within her. She yelled, her voice stronger than she felt. The posse's anger twisted into confusion, and she could see that they were beginning to doubt their own narrative. Yes, she was involved, but that night had been a confluence of choices that had led to tragedy. She wasn't the villain they had painted her to be. The leader snapped, voice dripping with authority. With every word spoken, the tension in the air thickened. She felt the shadows press in around her, darkness lurking just beyond their emotions. They had lost sight of themselves in the quest for vengeance, but what would it take to awaken their compassion? Would they be able to see the truth that was swirling amidst the chaos? She could sense their hesitation as fear gripped their hearts. "You think you're here for justice," she called out, "but what you really seek is revenge." Silence stretched as their faces shifted, uncertainty creeping in. For a moment, hope pushed through the fear like a flickering candle in a darkened room. "Talk to her," Jake urged, stepping closer, determination fueling his voice. "You don't have to live like this, hunting for something to make you feel better. Pain doesn't go away with blood." The posse's resolve began to crack as she looked into their eyes, each man fighting a battle deeper than the one playing out in front of them. They were crumbling under the weight of their emotions. Would they truly listen? Could they step back from their fury long enough to see beyond their rage? She asked, trying to reach the humanity buried beneath their anger. The leader hesitated, jaw clenched in an internal struggle. He challenged, but his focus faltered. The fierce anger that had burned bright was dimming, replaced by doubt. "This isn't about talking," she replied softly, locking eyes with each of them. "It's about understanding. It's about knowing that we're all human, flawed, and making mistakes. You don't have to destroy me to find closure. Look inside yourselves." The air grew heavy with the weight of her words. The rustling corn whispered around them as if echoing her plea. The silence stretched on, thick and charged, as they stood there wrestling with their emotions. A few shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, glancing nervously at one another. The leader's grip on his reins loosened slightly, that flicker of doubt growing stronger. "What happened was terrible," he finally admitted, voice quieter now. "So did I," she countered, her heart laid bare. "That night shattered more than just their lives. It broke something in me. I stand here, vulnerable and desperate to explain." One of the riders looked down, shaken. "You're asking us to forgive?" "Yes," she confirmed, feeling the weight of her own sorrow. "But forgiveness doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey just like healing, but it starts with honesty. I won't lie to you. I was involved, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Tears pricked her eyes as she felt the weight of their collective heartbreak. "You have every right to be angry, but it doesn't have to end in violence or destruction." As they listened, she saw the turbulence in their faces shift. It was a flicker of recognition, a moment where old wounds met the possibility of healing. They could stay prisoners of their anger or choose to walk the difficult path toward understanding. "It's not easy to just let go of pain," the leader muttered, his voice breaking. But the words felt like sunlight breaking through a thick haze. Hope bubbled in her chest, alive and stirring. "We can talk about it, share our stories. Every one of us carries a burden, but we don't have to carry it alone." The other riders shifted, murmurs of agreement working their way through the ranks, igniting a spark of change. What had begun as a hunt for revenge now felt like a gathering on the cusp of understanding. Finally, the leader swung down from his horse. "All right, let's hear your story." Tears spilled down her cheeks as relief flooded her heart. In that moment, the struggle between vengeance and compassion began to tip toward something more powerful: hope. They stood together, no longer divided by fear but connected in their shared humanity. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, they walked back toward the heart of the field, voices now blending together in a dialogue of healing. The sounds of anger faded into soft whispers, and in that sacred space, they began to rewrite their narrative, finding a path that led them toward one another instead of away. What started in chaos transformed into possibility, illuminating the darkness they had all carried. The corn swayed gently in the cool evening breeze, a silent witness to the unfolding of a new story, one that could carry them forward, away from the pain. In that moment beneath the vast sky, they became more than just individuals shaped by tragedy. They became a community seeking understanding, resilience, and the courage to stand together, even in the face of their darkest fears. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows through the dense cornfield, where tall stalks stood like sentinels in the fading light. It was a picture-perfect summer day, but for her, amid the rustling leaves, it felt like the calm before an impending storm. Hiding there, crouched in the cool earth, she could hear the thundering approach of galloping hooves, growing louder and more sinister with each passing moment. She pressed herself deeper into the earth, her heart racing in a desperate rhythm, praying to become one with the ground beneath her. The cornfield, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a prison, the scent of fresh soil and sweet corn, a cruel reminder of the freedom she once took for granted. Memories surged through her mind, memories of laughter and sunny days, suddenly punctuated by the memory of chaos, fear, and betrayal. "They can't find me," she whispered to herself, the words barely escaping her lips. She could still picture the warmth of the sun on her back, the carefree spirit of her friends, until everything spiraled out of control like a wildfire consuming the dry summer grass. Now those friends had turned into enemies, and the once joyous laughter had morphed into accusations laden with rage. As the hooves drew nearer, she caught snatches of muffled voices, laced with anger and urgency. "We know she's out here." The relentless pursuit echoed through the rows of corn, a cruel reminder of her reality. She had become the hunted, and the weight of their intent pressed down on her, suffocating in its intensity. Panic swelled in her chest, a stone heavy and cold. She could feel their eyes searching, probing the cornfield for signs of life, looking for her. The air grew thick with tension, every rustle of the corn echoing like a battle cry. Then, just as she thought they would surely pass, a figure emerged from the edge of the field, Jake. Her heart swelled with a mix of relief and fear. He was brave, but this was no game. Their lives were at stake. Could he stand against the tide of fury bearing down on them? Jake. She called softly, her voice trembling, but he shook his head, determination shining in his eyes. He shouted back, stepping further into view. The posse turned their attention toward him, confusion mixed with rage. It felt as though the world had frozen, the sounds of the horses almost drowned out by the thunderous beating of her heart. Would they turn that anger on him? The leader of the posse demanded, his voice cutting through the air. "You have to run." Jake exclaimed, stepping forward, his voice urgent yet steady. "She needs our help." But the men maintained their fury, the grip of their anger tightening around their hearts. Another rider barked, his face a mask of rage. Desperation consumed her, and she knew she had to act. She cried, stepping out from her hiding spot, her voice steady yet trembling. "You have it all wrong." The leader sneered, but beneath the surface she could see the tension wavering. "I was there. I witnessed everything unfold, the anger, the confusion, the mistakes. But what happened was an accident." Her breath hitched as emotions fought for release, wrestling against the fear that gripped her throat. The posse shifted, some glancing at each other, expressions of uncertainty creeping in as the weight of her words hung in the air. They were not just out for blood. Something deeper had drawn them into this chaos, loss, grief, anger. Jake took another step forward, courage shining in his eyes. "You don't have to live like this. You don't have to hunt her down in order to feel better." Their resolve softened just slightly, but she could feel the flicker of hope. "You think you'll find justice at the end of this path, but you're only feeding a cycle of pain. I'm asking you to listen to me." One of the men mocked, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," she said, her tone shifting to something raw, genuine. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or to escape punishment. I just want to explain." The leader gripped his reins tightly, the softness of doubt washing over him. "I don't just want you to believe me," she replied, staring into the eyes of each man. "I want you to see that we're all human, flawed, and capable of making mistakes. You've lost people too, and I understand that pain." A tense silence enveloped them, the air charged with uncertainty. It was a terrifying vulnerability that both terrified and empowered her. She could feel their anger wane slightly, their faces flickering from rage to contemplation. "Maybe you're right," the leader admitted, voice slow as if testing the weight of his own thoughts. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves around them as she held his gaze, heart racing. "It starts with understanding." A deep breath echoed through the group, and she could see the internal struggle play out on their faces. One of them whispered, voice trembling. "Then don't," she answered fiercely, her heart pounding in her chest. "But you can choose to seek healing instead of revenge." There was a flicker among the men, the weight of something unraveling within them. The chains of pain didn't have to bind them forever. They could shift toward compassion, toward understanding, but it required courage to step into the unknown. The leader asked, skepticism mixing with curiosity. "Yes," she breathed, feeling a hope blossom in her chest. "I'm willing to face my past if you're willing to confront yours. It's easier to stay angry, but it won't bring those we lost back." In that moment, something shifted. The men began to dismount from their horses, sharing uncertain glances, mingling with the lingering tension in the air. The leader asked, weakness creeping into his voice. "Yes," Jake affirmed, stepping beside her, his unwavering support a lifeline. "We can be stronger together." The posse stood still for a heartbeat, the moment stretching until it felt like a turning point in time. They shared a collective breath, chests rising and falling, and she could see the facade of anger begin to crack, revealing the raw pain of loss underneath. As they gathered in a circle, voices began to mix, weaving stories of heartache and resilience. The sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Laughter mingled with tears as they shared their vulnerabilities, their stories lifting each other up instead of tearing each other apart. What had started as a hunt for revenge amid chaos transformed into a dialogue of healing. They met grief with empathy instead of anger, breathing life back into the moments lost to the confusion. In that cornfield beneath the expanse of the twilight sky, they forged a bond of understanding. It was a fragile alliance, born not from weakness but from a newfound strength that galvanized them. No longer were they merely pursuers and prey. They became a community, standing together in their humanity. The darkness surrounding them began to lift, allowing hope to seep into the cracks where anger had once taken root. Together, they chose vulnerability, sharing not just their grief but their dreams of a new beginning. As the stars began to twinkle in the indigo sky, she felt a flicker of warmth growing inside her heart, a sense of belonging that had long been absent. This was the real power of their gathering, the refusal to be defined by tragedy alone. They were rewriting their own narratives, one of resilience, empathy, and unity. Underneath the gentle rustle of corn, a sweeping wind carried away the remnants of their anger, weaving new pathways for healing. Every story shared was a step forward into the uncharted territory of forgiveness and understanding. They had transformed their grief into something beautiful, a tribute to the lives lost and the strength found anew. In this field where pain had once echoed like a battlefield, the sounds of reconciliation resonated now, creating a harmony that promised a brighter future. They had walked through the darkness together and emerged on the other side, stronger and more connected than ever before. And as she stood there amid the corn, breathing in the night air, she knew they would navigate the rocky road ahead, not alone, but hand in hand, ready to face whatever awaited them with courage, hope, and the determination to forge a new path together. The sun hung low, painting the horizon in fiery orange and deep purple as shadows stretched across the cornfield. It was the kind of evening that felt deceptively peaceful, but for her, nestled between the towering stalks, tension coursed like a live wire. She crouched low, her knees pressed into the cool earth, heart hammering against her ribs. A moment of clarity washed over her as she realized this wasn't just a hiding spot. It was the last refuge she had. From somewhere beyond the rows of corn, she heard the thundering sounds of horses approaching. The posse was coming. Fear gripped her, forcing her breath to come in shallow gasps. She held her breath, trying to drown out the chaos of her thoughts. What had she done to end up here? How had this all spiraled so far out of control? Just hours earlier, she had been dreaming under the same blue sky, basking in the warmth of the sun, laughter echoing in the air. And now she was a fugitive, a target for the very people she had once called friends. The realization twisted her stomach, each wave of nausea a reminder of the wrong turn her life had taken. Someone shouted, their voice breaking through the rustle of leaves like a knife cutting the air. She can't be far. Her pulse quickened. They believed they had justice on their side, but what they truly sought was revenge. Their anger was palpable, a living thing that clawed at her skin. They had no idea how wrong they were, how much pain had already been inflicted. All they saw was a figure in the shadows, a ghost they needed to banish. Desperate, she pushed herself deeper into the corn, hoping it would swallow her whole, hoping the darkness would offer her some respite. She could hear their voices, feel their frustration. She was here. She fought the urge to scream, to run leaping paths through the rows of corn like a rabbit fleeing a predator. But running only brought more attention, and her heart pounded in her ears as the hoofbeats grew louder. They didn't see the truth. They didn't know she had been just as much a victim of fate as they were. The night everything shattered still replayed in her mind, the loud laughter, the camaraderie that dissolved into chaos when panic took over. One decision spiraled into a curse that haunted her, and now it felt like the very ground had turned against her. The thundering stopped, and a deep voice called out, "Split up. She can't be far. Check the edges, check the trees." Sweat beaded on her forehead. The fear of being found churned within her. What would they do if they caught her? She didn't want to think about it. The thought alone sent chills down her spine. There was no denying it anymore. She was alone, utterly exposed to judgment and retribution. A snap of a twig broke the tension, and she turned her head just in time to see a figure looming at the edge of the field. It was Jake, her friend. Relief washed over her, intertwined with dread. He had always been the brave one, the one who would face the storms. She called out quietly, panic rising in her throat. The last thing she wanted was for him to get involved in her mess, but he stepped forward, shaking his head. "I won't abandon you." "Jake, no." The desperation weighed heavy in her voice. But he stood his ground. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." With that, her heart sank. She had always admired his loyalty, but right now it was a liability. The posse turned their focus to him, their anger flicking like a flame. One of them shouted, his voice taut with indignation. Jake stepped closer, unwavering. "You don't know the whole story." The leader of the posse bristled, his face darkening. "She put lives in danger," she echoed, a spark of defiance igniting within her. "Is that what you think this is? You think you know what happened?" The tension crackled like electricity in the air. For a moment, her world shrank down to that stark truth: her, Jake, and the weight of their shared history. If she was going to have any chance of survival, she needed them to understand. Jake looked from her to the men surrounding them, pleading with his eyes. "What happened wasn't her fault. We were all there. It happened so fast." The posse hesitated, glancing at each other with uncertainty. It was a fragile moment, one that could tip either way. What would they do? Would they hear her out, or would their need for retribution swallow them whole? She shouted again, her voice fierce, filled with a strength that surprised even her. "If you want to blame someone, blame me, but don't get caught up in your hunger for vengeance." The leader's face flickered, and she caught a glimpse of uncertainty in his eyes for the first time. "You don't understand the pain you've caused," she cried, feeling the words spill out with a force that overwhelmed her. "We've all lost something." One of the posse members barked, resentment simmering just beneath the surface. "No, I don't," she admitted, eyes locked onto theirs. "But we can choose to confront this together." For a moment, time hung suspended. She could see the conflicting emotions playing out on their faces: pain, loss, confusion. The weight of her words hovered in the air, dancing between them like fireflies. She pressed, her voice softer now, raw and vulnerable. The leader shifted, uncertainty clouding his features. He insisted, voice wavering. She lowered her tone, speaking from the depths of her heart. "What's fair about hurting someone else when we're all already hurting? Fairness doesn't replace what we've lost, it only furthers our pain." Jake stepped forward, his determination unwavering. "We're not asking for forgiveness, but we can learn from this." With a deep breath, she felt something shift in the atmosphere. There in the vast cornfield, surrounded by echoes of their past, a fragile hope began to blossom. The choice was theirs, and for the first time they had a chance to change the narrative. Whispers began to weave through the group, uncertain at first but growing louder. One of the riders murmured, eyes caught between anger and understanding. "Together," Jake reminded them, glancing over at her, "we can figure this out." The leader's brow furrowed, but slowly he nodded, and the tension began to dissipate. One by one, the men dismounted, and she could feel the collective breath release, an acknowledgement that perhaps they were ready to take a step back from the brink. As they gathered into a circle, sharing small fragments of their stories, the setting sun painted their faces with golden light. The emotions they shared began to mix: fear, loss, longing, and with every word spoken, the distance between them began to shrink. What had started as an act of retaliation transformed into a dialogue of healing, where vulnerability and understanding became their guiding stars. In that moment, the pain that had once felt insurmountable took a backseat, revealing the deep ties they all shared as human beings. The more they spoke, the more they realized that the burden of grief didn't have to be carried alone. With every story they told, a thread of compassion wove them closer together, creating a tapestry rich with shared experience and resilience. The evening sky darkened and the stars began to dot the night, twinkling like fragile hopes in the vastness. Together, they were no longer enemies caught in a cycle of vengeance, but a coalition forged in understanding, standing side by side amid the rustling corn. In that moment, everything changed. They had stepped through the darkness and emerged, transformed. The heartbreak that had once defined them now turned into a collective journey toward healing. And as they held onto newfound hope, they realized that confronting their pain was the path to true freedom. The air grew still as laughter laced with tears ebbed and flowed, mingling with the gentle rustle of the corn. The same corn that had once felt like a prison now felt like the cradle of their redemption. They had chosen to embrace each other's humanity, to untangle the knots of anger, and to step into a future uncertain but full of promise. As they stood in the moonlit field, hearts open and minds clear, they understood that they had not just found a path toward healing. They had forged a bond that promised to illuminate the shadows of their past. In that cornfield, they had created a new story together, a narrative woven with compassion, understanding, and the kind of solidarity that thrived in the face of darkness. And as they began to walk back toward the light, they stepped into a future richer than any they could have ever imagined, igniting a shared journey where love would flourish, hand in hand. She lay flat against the cool earth, heart pounding like a war drum. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the endless rows of corn surrounding her, but that warmth felt like a distant memory. Hidden beneath the tall stalks, she felt utterly alone, the soft rustle of leaves a sharp contrast to the thunderous sound of hooves approaching. The posse was coming and they were angry. She whispered to herself, squeezing her eyes shut, willing the fear to subside. But the pounding of her heart drowned out her thoughts. How had everything gone so wrong? Just a few days ago, she had been laughing with friends, enjoying the last few days of summer before school began. But now she was a fugitive, hiding in a cornfield, hunted by her former friends. A voice shouted, gruff and filled with determination. She can't have gone far. Panic punched through her, and she pushed deeper into the corn. They believed she betrayed them, that she was responsible for the chaos that had followed that night. But they didn't know how quickly things had spiraled out of control. How could they, when anger clouded their judgment? The wind picked up, causing the corn to sway and rustle ominously, as if whispering secrets of its own. She held her breath, praying the sound of her heart wouldn't give her away. Memories crashed over her like a wave, a night filled with laughter, friendship, and then blood. The chaos had erupted so quickly she hadn't even had time to think, let alone to react. Her mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, flickering between guilt and fear. They would never understand. They'd only see the shadow of betrayal where she'd only wanted to help. The closer the hoofbeats got, the more the fear clawed at her throat, choking back her thoughts. It was only a matter of time before they found her. Another voice commanded, this one sharper and more desperate than the last. A chill raced down her spine and the instinct to flee surged within her. The urge was primal. It mingled with the fear gripping her. But where could she run? The cornfield surrounded her like a fortress, both a hiding place and a trap. If she moved now, she'd expose herself. Then she saw him, the leader of the posse, his face twisted with anger, his eyes scanning the horizon, searching for her. He shouted, "You can't hide forever." Their determination turned her stomach. They thought they were serving justice, but all she saw was thirst for revenge. They were a pack of dogs driven by an instinct to hunt. She pressed her back against the earth, praying for the ground to swallow her whole. Suddenly, a glimmer of movement caught her eye, a figure stepping out from the edge of the corn. It was Jake. Her heart leapt and then sank. He had always been the brave one, but was he really foolish enough to come here? She hissed, keeping her voice low, but he wasn't listening. He stepped forward, a fire blazing in his eyes. Jake yelled, a tinge of desperation coating his voice. Her breath caught. What was he thinking? There was no way he could fight them off. They were too many, too angry. She shot back, panic rising in her throat. But Jake shook his head defiantly. "I won't abandon you." In that moment, she felt a flicker of hope. Then she felt dread wash over her like a cold wave. If they saw him, if they turned their rage on him. "Jake, don't." But it was too late. The posse's attention shifted, their horses snorting and grinding at the earth, all faces turning toward him, faces twisted with anger and confusion. The fury of the hunt had masked their humanity, and suddenly he was in danger. One of them shouted incredulously. Jake stood tall, unfazed. What she did was a mistake. The lead rider repeated, incredulous. She put people's lives in danger. Jake's voice rose, filled with conviction. "You don't even know what she's been through." The leader of the posse scoffed, but uncertainty flickered across his face. And what about the damage she caused? The wind howled through the field, and for a brief moment they all stood there, confronting each other in the thick silence that ensued. The tension stretched like a taut string, ready to snap at any moment. "Let me explain what really happened," she urged, forcing her voice to break through the tension. "You don't understand, none of you do." The leader shouted, but she pressed on, emboldened by her fear and anger. She cried out, "It was a simple night that spiraled into chaos. I never wanted any of this." The air felt electric, a charged silence hanging between them, neither group ready to back down. The posse stood confused, anger battling with the flickering light of doubt. "Maybe we should listen to her," one of the riders murmured, shifting in his saddle, glancing at his companions. Another scoffed. Jake interjected, taking a step forward, confidence unwavering. "She's human, we're all human," snapped the leader, though now anger and doubt wrestled for control. Was he truly listening or just putting up a facade? "It doesn't have to be like this," she said, voice cracking with earnestness. "Anger won't bring back what you lost. It will only leave you bitter and broken." The air shifted again, the doubt growing in their expressions, but fear was still a heavy weight. Time froze as they contemplated her words, struggling against years of hurt and resentment. "Just give me a chance to explain," she pleaded, the balance tipping. "What happened that night has torn us all apart. An accident doesn't define who I am. Don't let your anger dictate your actions." For a moment, they were all still. The shadows of the cornfield felt like they were wrapping around her, pushing her toward an uncertain future. Would they choose to hear her or condemn her? The leader took a slow breath, and she saw something change in him. "What you say is true," he finally admitted, voice hoarse. "My life is shattered too," she admitted, her heart open. "Every day is a reminder, but I can't fix this alone." Another voice piped up, echoing the fears they all felt. "Nothing will change without a conversation," she retorted, looking each of them in the eye. "Decide now if you want to continue down this path of destruction or dare to seek something greater." Jogging desire for revenge wavered, and she felt the weight of their shared history pressing down like the heat of the sun. Jake stepped beside her, an anchor of unwavering support. "Let's step away from this madness," he urged, arms open as if embracing the possibility of hope. "We are all grieving. Let's share that grief." The leader of the posse nodded slowly, his resolve wavering. "Perhaps you're right." With that, the air shifted, and from the tension grew a tender moment of possibility. As they began to lower their weapons, she felt a swell of gratitude. It wasn't over, but they had taken the first step toward understanding. As the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows began to dance around them. Together, they drew a circle in the field, standing in the unity of shared humanity. No longer were they enemies, they had the chance to become something more. The first stories were hesitant, filled with the weight of unspoken truths, but soon they flowed freely, memories swirling together, hearts opening. They spoke of love lost, dreams shattered, the ache that resonated in each of them. In the midst of their pain, they found laughter, warmth, and echoes of empathy that had long been buried. As twilight deepened, the stars emerged, glimmering above like guiding lights. In that moment, standing in the cornfield, they realized they were a community forged through understanding. Their pain had connected them, binding them together more tightly than any anger could tear apart. With each voice that rose, the collective heart of the group began to mend. They no longer wore the weight of their anger like shackles. Instead, they carried each other's burdens, uplifting one another, seeking healing instead of revenge. Eventually, laughter filled the air, mingling with the rustle of corn around them as the night deepened. No longer were they hiding in shadows, lost in the fear of judgment. They stood together, bonded by a shared commitment to confront their pain and find closure. And just like that, in the flickering glow of the stars, they stepped through the darkness and emerged into a new dawn. Forgiveness wouldn't be easy, but they believed in the possibility. Together, they could create something beautiful, a story of redemption that deserved to be rewritten, crafted from the ashes of grief and anger. As she looked around, she knew they had turned a corner. No longer was she just hiding in the cornfield, but standing amongst allies, kindred spirits willing to face an uncertain future filled with hope. In that moment, everything changed. They had chosen to own their stories, to embrace vulnerability, and to transform pain into purpose. Together, they didn't just escape the shadows of their past. They emerged into the brilliance of tomorrow, ready to walk the journey ahead, hand in hand. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the sprawling cornfield. The air was thick and humid, infused with the intoxicating scent of sweet corn swaying gently in the breeze. It felt deceptively peaceful, But for her, this serene landscape was chaos waiting to erupt. She crouched in the soft earth, hidden among the tall stalks, heart racing like a wild animal. The sound of hoofbeats thundered in the distance, growing closer with each heartbeat. The posse was coming and panic surged through her veins. How had her life twisted into this nightmare? The laughter of friends from just a few days ago echoed faintly in her mind, reminding her of the warmth of camaraderie, the sweetness of summer evenings filled with joy. But that past now felt like a cruel joke. That night had changed everything, a night of poor choices that had sent her tumbling down a path of dread and isolation. A voice shouted, sharp and commanding. Each word cut through the stillness like a knife, bringing her back to the present. She can't be far. She pressed her back against the stalks, willing herself to blend into the earth, praying they wouldn't find her. How had she landed in this position? She could feel the bitter sting of guilt clawing at her throat. If only I had done something differently, she thought, replaying the events that led to this moment. Just hours earlier, she had been at the center of the world with laughter and light all around her. But the fun had turned sour when an innocent game morphed into something so much darker. One misstep, one moment of panic, and the next thing she knew, lives had been changed forever. The hooves thundered closer, and she could see shadows moving between the stalks. They were relentless, driven by a need for vengeance, and she was their target. Her heartbeat quickened as they shouted out commands, frustration lacing their voices. Split up. Fear poured into her bones, and instinct kicked in. She thought of running, abandoning the cornfield, and darting into the increasingly dark landscape. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. If she bolted, they would see her. Hiding was her only chance. Then another voice rang out, startling her. I saw her. The panicked call reverberated through the air, and dread washed over her like ice-cold water. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted movement at the edge of the field. Jake. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, relief crashing over her like waves, only to be followed by that familiar feeling of dread. He was venturing into dangerous territory. Jake, she hissed, fear rising in her throat, but he didn't listen. He called, his voice filled with urgency, echoing against the rustling corn. She shouted, panic slicing through her words, but it was too late. The posse's attention turned toward him, their horses snorting, restless under their riders. One of them growled, eyes narrowing. He stepped further into the field, undeterred. Jake shouted, conviction ringing true, but it only seemed to fuel their fury. Sneered one of the men, anger bubbling beneath the surface. She cried out, infused with desperation. You can't save me. No, he declared, stepping closer, determined. The tension in the air became palpable, the weight of their shared history lingering like a storm cloud. One of the posse's leaders demanded, his voice thick with indignation. Jake held his ground, because she's still a person, not a monster. She could see the doubt creeping into the posse's expressions, uncertainty roiling beneath their anger as they struggled with their conflicting emotions. She shouted, rallying her courage. The leader turned his attention back to her, nostrils flaring with anger. You think you can talk your way out of this? She echoed, filled with raw emotion. It was a mistake, just like all of us. What happened that night shattered everything. For a brief moment, silence stretched over the field, timeless and heavy. The only sounds were the rustling of the corn and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. With each passing second, the air was charged with uncertainty. The leader shouted, pulling his horse back and gripping the reins tightly. She shot back, frustration boiling over. Will it heal the wounds that night caused? Their collective breaths hung in the air as the tension slowly chipped away at their resolve. She could see them reconsidering their purpose, caught between anger and a desire to understand. In that moment of uncertainty, something shifted. Maybe she's right, one of the riders muttered thoughtfully, glancing between his comrades. All this anger. Another voice snapped, but the weariness was evident, as if they were beginning to question. Not just what she did, Jake interjected, stepping forward. It's because of how we reacted. We can't keep being prisoners of our own rage. The leader's expression hardened again, but there was a flicker of doubt. His voice was laced with frustration but tinged with curiosity. We can share our stories, she proposed, feeling a sense of empowerment rising within her. Come together instead of tearing each other apart. A murmur of agreement rippled among some of the men, and she felt a slight shift in the atmosphere. Could they really consider it? Could they begin to understand, to forgive? "One mistake doesn't define us," she continued, her voice stronger now, resonating with raw honesty. The leader pressed, skepticism laced with a hint of vulnerability. "Because I'm here standing before you, ready to own my part in this," she said, breathing deeply. "We can face our fears together. I won't turn away from what happened. I'll share my story if you share yours." The leader hesitated, eyeing her cautiously. As he opened his mouth, she saw a shift in the shared energy. The tension that had gripped them seemed to loosen just a fraction. "Fine," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's hear it." "I'm not asking for leniency," she interrupted. "I'm asking for understanding." As they settled into a circle, the air was filled with equal parts apprehension and hope. They stood together in the quiet of the cornfield, and as she shared her story, her heart poured out into the words. She spoke of that fateful night, the laughter, the celebration, the moments that spiraled into chaos. Each detail spilled forth, raw and honest. She relayed the hot rush of panic that had taken over, the events flashing before her eyes in a swirling blur until everything shattered around her. The men listened, and something began to shift in their expressions. They nodded, some frowning, considering the gravity of her words. She saw doubt transform into empathy, perhaps even a little remorse. When Jake shared his part, she felt very much in this together. The camaraderie that had once filled their lives slowly began to weave its way back into their hearts. They dipped into vulnerability, speaking of their losses and regrets, sharing the dark corners of their souls, the pain of betrayal and the questions they'd carried ever since that night. The sun had dipped below the horizon, the stars emerged, twinkling above like distant hopes. They shared not only their grief but their dreams for redemption, reconnecting with the love that had once defined their friendships. Laughter erupted at times, breaking through the heaviness, and she felt that the grip of anguish was loosening bit by bit. By the time they finished sharing their stories, the night was laced with a sense of possibility, as if a new chapter had begun. Together, they'd stood in the shadows of the past, yet they were leaving that darkness behind. It was a freedom she had thought lost to her forever. "We're still here," the leader finally admitted, looking around at his companions. "And we'll keep standing together," she replied, tears brimming in her eyes. As the last glimmers of daylight faded, they made a pact, one fueled by understanding, empathy, and a commitment to embrace their shared humanity. They would carry their wounds, but they wouldn't let them define their futures. Instead of riding off in pursuit of revenge, they left the cornfield together with purpose, a renewed bond glimmering in the moonlight. The shadows of their past still lingered, but they now faced the darkness as allies, ready to write a new story, not one defined by anger, but one illuminated by the light of resilience and compassion. And as they stepped beyond the borders of the corn, they knew they carried with them the courageous decision to step away from fear and into the promise of healing. Together, they had transformed that night into something far greater, an opportunity to emerge as a community, forever changed by the power of understanding. In those fields, they discovered the beauty of second chances, forging a path toward a brighter future woven with the threads of hope, shared laughter, and the strength of unity. She crouched low in the cornfield, heart racing, ears straining to catch the distant sound of hoofbeats. The sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the rows of corn like dark fingers reaching out. What had started as an ordinary summer evening was now thick with tension and fear. She could hear the posse coming, and panic surged through her veins. They were searching for her. The whispers of the corn swayed around her, the gentle rustling turning sinister in the fading light. Each crunch of gravel underfoot and each frustrated shout from the riders sent a shiver down her spine. She pressed her back against the cool earth, her mind racing through the events that had led to this moment. How had everything gone so wrong? Just hours earlier, she had been celebrating with friends, laughter echoing across the field. They had joked and danced under the carefree blue sky, sipping lemonade and dreaming of summer adventures. But then everything changed in an instant, as if a storm had swept through their lives, upending everything they held dear. "Spread out." A voice shouted, cutting through her frantic thoughts like a blade. They were angry, she knew that much. They believed she had betrayed them, that she was somehow responsible for a tragedy that none of them could fully comprehend. But they didn't know the truth, didn't know the fear that had tangled her heart that night. Her breath quickened as the posse drew nearer, their horses snorting in frustration. Another voice barked. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, her body instinctively shifting deeper into the corn, seeking the safety of the earth. She urged herself. What could she do? She was alone, isolated, shielded only by a flimsy wall of greens and browns. Memories flooded her mind, moments of joy punctured by an explosion of chaos. The laughter, the bright smiles had faded, replaced now by shouts and screams. She shivered, remembering the panic as everything unraveled, the moment where things spiraled out of control. Her body trembled as she fought back tears, feeling so lost in the sea of fear. Then suddenly, a sound snapped her back to reality, the creaking of saddles, the muffled shuffle of hooves on the dirt road. They were closer now, their voices sharper, more frantic. She was here, I saw her. She pressed her hands against her ears, her heart thundering in her chest. Please, please, she whispered, desperation clawing at her throat. Just then, she caught sight of a figure emerging from the edge of the field. It was Jake, her friend. Relief washed over her, but it was immediately tinged with dread. She muttered under her breath. Hey, Jake's voice called, echoing through the field. She shouted, panic spilling out of her. You have to go. But he stepped further into the cornfield, his determination unyielding. He yelled, a fierce glimmer in his eyes. The sound of the hoofbeats thundered even louder now, the posse turning their heads, drawn to his voice like moths to a flame. One of the posse shouted, his anger boiling over. Jake shouted back, holding his ground, though she could sense his fear. You don't know what really happened. The leader of the posse sneered, face twisted with frustration. Jake declared, voice rising. You think vengeance is going to make it better. The tension ratcheted higher, a charged silence enveloping them. For a moment it felt like time stood still as each side grappled with the gravity of what lay between them. She felt a flicker of hope igniting in her chest, but reality snuffed it out quickly. The leader barked, gripping the reins of his horse tightly. You think you can talk your way out of this? She put lives at risk. But her heart soared as Jake stepped closer, unwavering. We've all made mistakes, he implored, desperation edging his voice. We need to work through this together. One of the men shouted. I don't think anyone is innocent anymore, Jake shot back, frustration bubbling in his tone. This isn't about blame anymore. The lead rider shouted again, but doubt flickered across his face. She could almost see the battle taking place in his mind, the conflict of anger and sorrow glowing just below the surface. With an intensity that surprised even her, she shouted, You don't have to do this. Chasing me won't help you. The air felt heavy, a charged silence stretching as the truth of her words sank in. You don't even know the pain you're carrying, she said, her voice trembling but fierce. Can't you see? We can choose a different path. Suddenly another shout rang out and she could see the leader wavering, uncertain. One of the men sighed, exhaustion etched into his features. Closure comes from understanding, she pleaded, her heart racing, and from letting go of the anger. The men faltered, their resolve starting to crack. The noise of the hoofbeats seemed to fade into the background, and all that remained was the pulsing heart of hope that beat within her. She could see it in their eyes, a flicker of doubt against the backdrop of rage. Let her explain, Jake urged, stepping forward, his voice calm but firm as he met their gaze. The leader tethered the reins tightly, caught between the weight of grief and the desperate need for resolution. As he shifted in the saddle, something shifted in the air around them. He asked, but there was an edge of uncertainty now. It might not fix everything, she replied softly, heart pounding, but we can try. For a heartbeat, it felt like the sun itself dimmed, the world holding its breath, waiting for their decision. She held on to the hope that perhaps they could find a way to communicate, to begin to heal. The leader exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. You're asking for a lot, he muttered, but crack after crack formed in his hardened expression. Me too, she said, her voice breaking. Every day is a reminder of my mistakes. I never wanted this chaos, and I never wanted to hurt anyone. Tension gave way slightly as they exchanged glances, uncertainty groaning like the horses beneath them. For the first time, she felt the wheels of change beginning to turn. We've all suffered, Jake stated, his voice steady now, reverberating with empathy. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, painting the sky a deep orange, something fundamental shifted in the posse. One by one, they began to dismount, faces weary but curious. She breathed lightly, unsure if this was an opportunity or a trap. "All right," the leader said slowly. "Let's hear what you have to say." "I'm not," she interrupted, her voice steady. "I'm here to share my truth, to face the consequences of my actions." They formed a circle in the field, the vibrant corn standing tall around them like witnesses to a profound revelation. The air was electric with potential, with fear and uncertainty intermingled. As she began to recount that fateful night, shadows shifted, and the world around her melted away. She painted a vivid picture of their joyous celebration, recounted the laughter, the stories, the warmth of friendship that unraveled so quickly. It had been a night filled with dreams, but it had twisted into chaos when the unexpected happened. Each word was heavy with the weight of guilt, but she spoke without flinching, allowing them to see her truth. Tears pooled in her eyes as she shared the moment when everything spiraled out of control, when fear and panic had overtaken them. She spoke of the recklessness that ensued, the way laughter had turned into screams. The men listened, their expressions shifting as they absorbed her story, starting to understand the tragic web of events that had unfolded that night. The tension began to ease, empathy blooming where anger had once reigned. When it was Jake's turn, she felt his anguish, a close bond forged in their shared experience, interwoven with connections stretched thin by circumstances beyond their control. He talked about the aftermath, how he had felt helpless, wanting to shield her from the accusations that had come crashing down. As twilight deepened, the stars began to reveal themselves. The laughter and warmth that had suffocated under rain of anger began to bubble up again, transforming a grim situation into one of unity. "I'm sorry," the leader finally admitted, voice breaking. "We shouldn't have let our feelings dominate our judgment." "That's all we want," she said softly, hope flickering like a candle flame. "Together," Jake added firmly. Gradually, the darkness began to lift, replaced by the dawning light of possibility. They stood together in that cornfield, once divided, now united. They had all chosen to heal, not let the past define them. But just as relief began to wash over her, a shout pierced the air. In an instant, the shadow of the past threatened to swallow them whole. The posse turned, fear and anger igniting once again as a new wave of riders burst through the trees, faces grim and focused. The leader breathed, eyes darting towards the approaching figures, uncertainty slipping back into the cracks of their newfound harmony. Her heart sank as the reality crashed down upon her. The fight wasn't over. The posse that had once felt like a chance at unity now felt like another wave crashing against them, threatening to drown all hope in its tide. Gasping for breath, she looked around at the tired faces of the men who had begun to understand her, now gripped again by fear and anger. Would this cycle continue forever? Could they truly overcome their demons in the face of new threats? Jake shouted, pulling her into his embrace, but something tightened around her heart. As the riders drew closer, she could feel the ground swell beneath her, the danger rising like the shadows in the cornfield. The chapter was not finished. It had only just begun.